Welcome to Jackson's Music Collection. I am your host, Jackson. I've been wanting to make a vinyl channel for probably like a few months now. Started off on Facebook, and I was trying to think of how to start my first video. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys my entire vinyl collection. Now I'm going to start off because I don't usually some people usually do alphabetical order. I don't really do alphabetical order. I separate them all by genre. Then I separate them by the date they came out on, or the year, the specific date they came out on. I mean, it's weird. A lot of people might find that weird, but that's the way I do it. So I'm gonna start off with my soundtracks. This is probably gonna be a multiple part series, probably 2 parts, because I'm gonna start off with my soundtracks and probably end of my 60s rock, and next part might be my 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, 2020s, all that. And also, I'm gonna do another one showing you guys my CDs, same exact way. I'm not gonna show my. I do have greatest hits, but I won't show them because it's just that will be too much. Yes, I do have greatest hits albums, but I don't really listen to them as much as my actual studio albums. Well, without further ado, let's get into the video. We're gonna start off with soundtracks, and the first soundtrack that I have in my collection is the Pirates of the Caribbean Ride soundtrack. This probably came out around. The ride was probably made in the 60s, so the soundtrack pretty much came out in the 60s. I got this at Disneyland for $22 or $21. Well, technically 22 if you count the tax, but this is on a picture disc. Next up, I have the Godfather soundtrack, which is the first Godfather that came out probably early 70s. I think the movie came out in 71. I don't remember. I need to probably look that up again. But great movie, great soundtrack. Up next, I have the Pretty in Pink soundtrack. Now, this came out, I believe, in the late 80s. I think 86. I could be wrong though. But this is it. No, it has a bunch of new wave on it. Next up, I have the Cowboy Beatbop soundtrack, and this came out in 1998. And this is a remastered version of it. Seatbelts did the soundtrack, and it's also on both discs are colored. Like a purple and a red marble. And finally, in my soundtrack collection, I have the Princess and the Frog soundtrack on picture disc. This is one I ordered not too long ago. This came out in 2009. Now, up next, I'm going to show you the one and only holiday album that I own. And that is Mariah Carey's Merry Christmas. And this is also on a colored vinyl. This, I believe, came out in 1994. Nice little Christmas colors, nice little Christmas splatter. Now, next up, we have my country. Now, first, we have Johnny Cash, live at San Quentin. This came out, I believe, in 1969. This has A Boy Named Sue on it. Up next, we have Commander Cody and his Lost Planet Airmen, Lost in the Ozone. This is the album that has Hot Rod Lincoln on it. This, I believe, came out in 1971. It's a pretty good country rock album. Next up, we have another country rock band, the Dirt Band, also known as the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. An American Dream, which I believe came out in 1979. We have another country rock, southern rock band, Charlie Daniels Band, the Charlie Daniels Band, which I believe this came out in 1980. Full Moon. Up next, we have my reggae, the only reggae album that I own on vinyl. Third World. 69 Degrees in the Shade. This, I believe, came out in 1977. Up next, we have my electronic, and we have Flamagra by Flying Lotus. This, I believe, came out in 2019. Up next, we have hip hop. Dr. Dre's The Chronic, which I believe came out in 1993. Up next, we have my new age, Fresh Air 3 by Mannheim Steamroller. I think I pronounced that right. Up next, we have my one and only blues album that I own on vinyl, which saddens me because I want to own more blues albums on vinyl. It's hard to come by blues albums because no one really gives up their blues albums. The Blues Brothers, Made in America. I believe this came out in 1980. Next up is my jazz, which is a lot of albums. This is all of my jazz. It's the second biggest in my collection, other than my rock and roll, my rock and pop. Miles Davis, Porgy and Bess, which came out in 1959. Al Hurt, Sugar Lips, which I believe came out in 1961. The Other Side of Abbey Road, George Benson, which I believe came out in 1970. White Rabbit by George Benson, which I believe came out in 73, 71, 70, either 71 or 73, I don't remember. Chick Corea and Return to Forever, which came out in 71, so that George Benson album came out around 71. Chick Corea and Return to Forever, Lies of Heather, which this came out in 72. The Crusaders, Unsung Heroes, which came out in 1973. Carlos Santana and Alice Coltrane, Evolutions. I hope I pronounced that right. I think I pronounced it right. Yeah, Evolutions. Sorry if I'm pronouncing it bad. This came out in 1974. This is actually a really good jazz album. The Art of Tea, Michael Franks. I believe this came out in 76 or 75. Chuck Managi, Chase the Crowds Away. I believe this came out in 1975 or 6. I don't remember. This was my grandpa's album. Yeah, he wrote his last names on a lot of his albums. Stanley Turrentine. I believe that's how you pronounce his last name. This The Sugar Man, which came out in 75. So yeah, so his last two albums came out in 75. Stanley Turrentine again. Have you ever seen The Rain? Which I guess came out in 75. The Return to Forever. Romantic Warriors, which came out in 76. And this is one of my favorite jazz albums. This is up there for jazz. Right next to Can of Blue. George Benson, Breezin', which I believe this came out in 76. Michael Franks, Sleeping Gypsies, this came out in 77. The Crusaders, Street Life, this came out in 79. Masayoshi Takanaka, Alone, this came out in 1981. This got shipped to me from Japan. And this has an album and the single in it, which the single is colored, and the single, I don't really take the single out because the single is very, very paper thin. I only listen to the album. I don't really take it out because there it is, and as you can see, it's very, very wobbly, very, very, very flexible, but it's red. And finally, we have Lowrider by Earl Cagoule. Calgoo. Up next, we have my Funk, which is my fourth biggest in my collection. First up, we have Maggot Brain, which is a great album. If you ever want to get into psychedelic funk or P-funk, this is a great album to listen to. This is a great psychedelic album just to listen to. This is also a colored vinyl. It's like a orange tan. Up next we have Rags the Rufus by Rufus and Chaka Khan. This came out, I believe, in '74. Now, I forgot one of my funk albums, which it was. I mean, I knew I was gonna forget it because it was displayed on my bottom shelf, but it is LaBelle. Nightbirds. Yeah, Nightbirds by LaBelle, which came out in 1974. Up next, we have Motor Booty Affair by Parliament. And this is another good funk album. This came out in '78, I believe. Up next, we have Rufus and Chaka Khan, Master Jam, which came out in '78. We have Zapp. Zapp. This is their self-titled first album. And this came out in 1980. Up next, we have Computer Games by George Clinton. I don't know if you see the the cover, but the cover is 3D. I don't know if you see it moving, but it's a 3D cover. This came out, I believe, in '83. Up next, we have Cool on the Gang, Emergency. This came out in '84. We have a 12-inch single, Double O, which came out in '75 by George Clinton. And finally, we have another one of my favorite albums of all time, Awaken My Love by Childish Gambino, which came out in 2016, which honestly, in my opinion, this is the best album of the 2010s. This is a great album. It's psychedelic. It's has a lot of neo soul, a lot of psychedelic funk, a lot of R&B. It's amazing. It's an outstanding album. If you wanna, I'd recommend them. I bet you half people watching this probably have listened to this album. But if you haven't, sit down and listen to it. It's a great album. Up next is my soul and R&B, which is the third biggest in my collection. First up, we have the Chambers Brothers, The Time Has Come, a psychedelic soul album which came out in 1967, my bad. The Sky's the Limit by The Temptations, which came out in 1971. I've Got So Much to Give by Barry White, which came out in 1971. Happiness is Being with the Spinners, which came out in 1976 by the Spinners. Songs in the Key of Life by Stevie Wonder. Now, this is an album that I will highly recommend to anyone that's trying to get into music or vinyl collecting in general. This is such a great album. This is the best album that I have ever listened to in my life. It is such a good album. If you want to listen to a great album, listen to this album right here. Such a good album. It has a bunch of classics on it. LTD, Something to Love, which came out in '77, I believe. Naturally High by the Commodores. That came out in '77. Midnight Magic by the Commodores, which came out in '78. Heroes by the Commodores, which came out in 1980. Outlaw by War, which came out in 1983. Thriller by Michael Jackson, which came out in '83, I believe. Donna Summers, She Worked Hard for the Money, which I believe came out in '84. Tina Turner, Private Dancer, which I believe came out in '85, '84. I think it came out in '85. I think this came out in '85. And last but not least, we have Bruce Willis. If It Don't Kill You, It Just Makes You Stronger, which came out in 1989. Now, this video has gone on long enough. It's reaching almost probably 15 minutes. I was gonna do my '60s, but I think I may have saved the '60s rock for part 2, which I might do '60s rock and early '70s because that's a lot. So I might do all that and do the rest, late mid late '70s to my 2010s in the next part. So I'm gonna leave it here. Hope you all enjoyed this, and I'll see you on the next video. Adios.